Now to some breaking news from Syria, where Russia and Turkey have just announced a ceasefire in Idlib, the country's last rebel-held stronghold. Let's get the latest from our correspondent Jamal Elshayyal, who's in the Turkish capital, Ankara. So tell us more about the details of this announcement.
Well, Lauren, as we know, Russia and Turkey are the two of the three main guarantors of the de-escalation process, if we can call it that, that's been going on for a couple of years now, an attempt by regional countries to try and bring a reduction in the fighting after they admitted, obviously, that it was difficult to bring a total end to that. And Idlib was, as you mentioned, the last remaining stronghold of the opposition. However, despite previous agreements and these guarantors reaching some sort of a deal to stop the violence and the constant bombardment in Idlib, the past several months have seen an escalation of attacks both by the army of the Bashar al-Assad regime as well as by the Russians themselves. And that's led to hundreds of thousands of civilians essentially fleeing Idlib, 300,000 in the month of December alone, and most of them, of those 700,000 over the past, say, 7 to 8 months, have been heading towards Turkey, which has been an added burden, obviously, to the millions that are here today. So Turkey has said for a long time that this has to stop, that there needs to be an end to the violence, there needs to be some sort of a deal. We're not quite sure exactly what has changed things now, possibly the Turks being able to convince the Russians, who are considered to be at least on good terms with them, that there is a need to find a solution to this. But this also comes on the eve of a visit by the US Representative to Syria, James Jeffries, to Turkey. So maybe is this part of something bigger? We're not quite sure, but definitely in and of itself, it is very significant.
And tell us a little bit about the situation on the ground. I mean, who would police or enforce any kind of ceasefire?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are armed rebel groups there that, for the large part, fall under the influence, let's say, of Turkey. In terms of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, as well as their proxies there, ultimately they do abide by whatever Moscow tells them. In fact, it was only a few days ago that the Syrian president himself was essentially summoned to meet the Russian president in a Russian military base in Syria. So Vladimir Putin went to Syria, and rather than meeting Assad in the presidency, Assad went to see him in a military base there, which some pundits would say reflects just the significance, or at least how the dynamics of that relationship work. So in terms of who would police it, really, that's why you have those guarantors. Obviously, there are certain groups that would maybe fall out of that sphere of influence, but for a large part, the most significant firepower, let's say, is under the direct or indirect command of both Turkey and Russia, and obviously, by extension, Iran as well.
Jamal Elshayyal, thank you very much.